They branded me a thief for drinking from my own well. Sounds ridiculous, right? But it stopped being funny the moment 3 HOA trucks pulled into my driveway, workers climbing out with shovels and metal detectors, insisting they were about to uncover stolen pipes. I just stood there thinking, what pipes? I'd built everything on my property to avoid theirs in the first place. Almost overnight, the neighbors who once waved at me like friends now looked at me as though I'd been siphoning water from their faucets for years. I'd seen plenty of horror stories online about overreaching HOAs, but living through it firsthand was a different nightmare altogether. Honestly, tell me you wouldn't have lost your cool right there. That Tuesday morning had started perfectly fine. I was sitting on my deck, sipping fresh orange juice made with my own filtered well water, appreciating the fact that my home sat a good 300 years outside HOA territory. Then a process server showed up. He handed me papers with an apologetic look, probably wondering why anyone would bother suing a guy who had a very visible, very real well pump in his front yard. When his car finally disappeared down the gravel drive, I opened the envelope only to find one of the most absurd legal claims I'd ever seen. $18,000 in damages for unauthorized utility use. According to Paige Whitman and the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, I had supposedly been tapping into their water system for 5 years, running pipes through solid bedrock and connecting them to my house without anyone noticing. I actually laughed out loud. Pipes through bedrock? I'd need a Marvel-level engineering lab to pull that off. The accusations were so outlandish, I read the document twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Maybe I should have taken it more seriously right then, but honestly, how do you keep a straight face when someone's accusing you of stealing water in a way that defies basic physics? My name's Adam Wright, I'm 36, and I work as a financial advisor. Numbers and documents are literally my bread and butter. When I bought this land 4 years back, I intentionally chose a property outside HOA control. The previous owner had installed a private well and septic system, which meant total independence from city utilities. That freedom was the entire reason I bought here. No dues, no committees telling me what shade of beige my house should be, no neighbors trying to micromanage my life. And yet, here I was, facing a lawsuit with diagrams of professional-looking diagrams, not scribblesses showing supposed underground pipes linking my property to their water system. The level of detail was startling. Most HOA squabbles I'd heard of involved mailbox colors or fence heights, not elaborate engineering charts accusing someone of utility fraud. Who even has time to fake documents like this? As I studied their so-called evidence, my coffee went cold. The lawsuit didn't just demand $18,000 plus legal fees, it also demanded access to my property so they could inspect and verify the alleged connections. That part bothered me far more than the money. They wanted the right to tear up my yard, to dig through the garden I'd spent years perfecting with raised beds, fruit trees, and carefully planned landscaping, all because of a claim built on lies. Walking my property line later that day, I shook my head at the absurdity. Meadowbrook's land ended well before mine began. A creek and 50 yards of thick woods clearly separated us. For their theory to be true, I would have had to bore under the creek, through the forest, and up a hill just to reach their main line. The cost of such a project would have exceeded my entire property value. Yet somehow, they believe it or wanted others to believe that I'd accomplished it in secret. It felt like being accused of tunneling into Fort Knox, except instead of stealing gold, I was supposedly sneaking off with tap water that tasted like chlorine and cost $12 a month. But then something in their documentation gave me pause. Their usage calculations were eerily precise: gallons per day, seasonal changes, even appliance estimates. The numbers matched my actual well usage far too closely. How could they know that? The only way would be if someone had been monitoring my property, or if they had access to utility data they shouldn't. Either way, it meant this wasn't just a lazy bluff. Someone had put real effort and likely money into building this case. The smart move would have been to call my lawyer, David Henderson. He'd helped me buy the property and would have known exactly how to handle this. But David was neck-deep in a corporate merger and unavailable for at least 2 weeks. The HOA's lawsuit required a response in 10 days. Waiting wasn't an option, so, against my better judgment, I decided to represent myself for the initial response. After all, How hard could it be to prove I wasn't hooked up to their water system? I had the original inspection report, county well permits, and 4 years of zero municipal water bills. The evidence was on my side. Surely, the truth would be enough. At least, that's what I told myself. My dad always said that honest people have nothing to hide, and liars eventually trip over their own falsehoods. But as I reread those documents, doubt began creeping in. What if they had more tricks? What if this was bigger than a simple misunderstanding? By nightfall, the HOA would be spinning their story to the entire neighborhood, casting me as the villain, and I couldn't tell if I was about to dismantle their bluff or walk straight into a trap. The Meadowbrook clubhouse was already overflowing that evening. Word had spread fast about the supposed water thief. 50 people crammed into a space built for 30, folding chairs borrowed from the rec center. Residents packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with hostility before the meeting even began. I slipped into a seat in the back, hoping to quietly observe what Paige Whitman had planned. In hindsight, I should have realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary home meeting. This was an ambush. Paige ran the room like she'd been rehearsing for weeks. Mid-50s, polished blonde hair, a tailored suit that screamed authority. Everything about her screamed confidence and control. She had a projector, carefully prepared slides, printed handouts for every attendee, and a laser pointer she brandished like a prosecutor in court. This wasn't a complaint session. It was a performance, meticulously designed to destroy my credibility and rally the neighborhood against me. And as much as I hated to admit it, her preparation was impressive yet terrifyingly so. According to Paige, my so-called theft was costing every household in their community an extra $12 a month. Someone in the third row pulled out her phone and began live streaming, sending my humiliation to dozens of online viewers. The comments scrolling by were a mix of jokes, insults, and calls for my arrest. Paige delivered her slideshow like a seasoned prosecutor. She claimed she'd uncovered my illegal connection during a routine audit, painting me as some scheming neighbor who'd been leeching off honest families for years. To the untrained ear, it sounded credibly researched, logical, even righteous. But it was all fiction. The most disturbing part, people believed her. One by one, neighbors nodded along as Paige described in detail how someone could tap into their water system. She had polished answers for every question, and her documentation made the accusations look airtight. A woman near the front asked how such a crime could go unnoticed for so long. Paige didn't miss a beat as she claimed clever thieves target properties just outside HOA borders, where oversight is weaker. And just like that, I'd been labeled a sophisticated thief. Sitting beside her was Lucas Green, the home manager, mid-40s, restless demeanor, the type of guy who thrives on handling complaints and other people's money. He supplied Paige with extra papers, charts, and even what appeared to be correspondence from utility companies confirming the alleged theft. Their case file was polished, professional, and frankly terrifying. When Paige opened the floor for questions, things turned ugly. One resident asked why I'd chosen to live so close to their neighborhood if I didn't want to contribute fairly. Another suggested that anyone who stole water probably stole other things too, and maybe packages, maybe mail. Someone else even claimed they'd seen me near their fence line, implying I was scouting for more opportunities to steal. The paranoia spread fast, just as Paige had planned. I wish I could say I kept calm, but who could? I stood up and identified myself as Adam Wright. That single admission was enough to ignite the room. Angry murmurs, accusing stares. It felt like standing in front of a firing squad. My chest pounded as I tried explaining. I had my own well, my own septic system, and zero ties to their utilities. But Paige had anticipated this. She pulled up more slides, showing how illegal connections could be cleverly hidden, how fake wells were sometimes installed as cover, and how utility theft had become increasingly advanced. Every denial I offered, she countered with another explanation that made me look guiltier. It was a brutal display of manipulation, and the neighbors I'd once exchanged polite greetings with now glared at me like I was a crook. Mrs. Patterson from Maple Drive asked if I was the reason her water pressure had dropped. Mr. Rodriguez openly wondered if his higher bills were my fault. These weren't faceless strangers. If these were people I saw at the store, People who once waved when I walked by. Now they genuinely believed I'd engineered some elaborate water heist scheme just to save a few dollars. When the meeting ended, Lucas cornered me in the parking lot. His tone was softer than Pegaza reasonable, almost sympathetic. He suggested we settle quietly. Maybe I could pay $2,000 up front, then the balance over 6 months, and agree to hook up to their municipal water system going forward. He made it sound like a favor, a way to avoid bad press and court drama. But the more he talked, the less it made sense. If they had ironclad evidence, why offer me a deal? Why let me pay pennies on the dollar if I'd supposedly stolen thousands? His eagerness triggered suspicion, and then he slipped up. He mentioned their evidence was already prepared for court. That phrasing hit me like a brick. Evidence is discovered, gathered, investigated. It isn't prepared in advance, not unless someone knows exactly what's going to be found. That single word prepared was the first crack in their perfect performance. By the time I walked back to my car, I could hear neighbors whispering about posting the story online, warning other HOAs about me, even petitioning the county to investigate properties near their borders. My reputation was already shredded, and the rumors were multiplying by the hour. The next morning, I went straight to the county utilities office. The place looked like a fortress, of bulletproof glass at the counters, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the faint smell of disinfectant in the air. Sarah Mitchell, the clerk on duty, wore the wary look of someone used to fielding angry complaints about bills. I slid Paige's lawsuit across the counter and explained my situation. Her eyebrows shot up as she read. At first, she cited privacy rules, the kind of bureaucratic red tape designed to make ordinary people give up. But once I showed her the lawsuit diagrams claiming my property was connected to Meadowbrook's system, her demeanor changed instantly. Court filings get special treatment, apparently, and suddenly she was eager to help. For the first time in days, it felt like a break. She dug through digital files, aerial maps, and permits stretching back 12 years, to when Meadowbrook first built their water lines. Every record told the same story. My land had never been connected to their utilities. Not during development, not after. The timestamps, inspector signatures, and permits all confirmed it. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. Sarah frowned, then called her supervisor. 3 weeks earlier, a new utility map had been uploaded to the system, one showing my property linked to Meadowbrook's main water line. The revision carried authorization codes and was filed under the name Lucas Green. The problem? Sarah had never heard of Lucas Green, and according to her, changes like that require in-person verification. Someone had forged official records to make me look guilty. The county records supervisor, Frank, explained that updating utility maps requires multiple forms of ID and in-person verification, which meant someone had either hacked into the system or forged credentials to upload those fake documents. When Sarah turned the monitor toward me, showing my property suddenly connected to Meadowbrook's waterline, my hands actually shook. They'd fabricated official records in my name. Frank didn't sugarcoat it. Tampering with infrastructure maps is a federal crime, the kind that draws FBI attention and prison sentences. After past security scares about water supply tampering, counties treat these systems like critical infrastructure. This wasn't just about harassing me. Whoever did this had crossed into national security territory. I just stared at him, stunned that a neighborhood dispute had escalated into potential federal charges. Sarah printed out both sets of maps, the original, legitimate version and the falsified only, along with timestamps proving exactly when the changes were uploaded. Each page bore government seals and signatures that would carry weight in any courtroom. She also handed me contact info for the FBI's cybercrime unit and the state attorney general, urging me to report the fraud immediately. Frank warned me, though, cases like this drag on for months, and once perpetrators realize federal investigators are involved, they usually double down on intimidation. My gut twisted at the thought. What would escalation even look like? Then Frank dug deeper into the database history and uncovered something chilling. Lucas Green's name appeared on several other questionable map edits over the past 6 months, always involving homes near HOA boundaries. Each of those properties had later been hit with billing disputes. It wasn't just me. There was a pattern, a scheme. While Sarah assembled my evidence packet, Another clerk whispered that 3 families had already settled similar claims quietly rather than fight. That revelation made me furious. Innocent people had been bullied into paying thousands just to avoid drawn-out legal battles. In fact, records showed at least 7 properties had been targeted in the past year and a half, bringing in over 40 grand for the perpetrators. This wasn't petty harassment, it was organized fraud. They'd perfected the playbook: fabricate documents, unleash community pressure, then corner the victim into paying settlements. Now I understood why their case against me had looked so polished. They'd been running this con for a while. Walking back to my car with the government-stamped folder in hand, I finally felt like I had solid ground to stand on. Official records don't lie, and federal agencies don't ignore infrastructure tampering. But my relief evaporated the moment my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number popped up, with a photo attached. It showed me walking into the county utilities office, timestamped that very morning. Someone was watching me. The message read, "We know you're digging. Stop, or deal with the consequences." No name, no reply option, just a threat. Instead of fear, anger boiled up. If anything, their desperation confirmed I was getting close. I snapped a screenshot and emailed it to myself to preserve the record. If Lucas could tamper with county databases, who knew what else they might plant under my name? By mid-afternoon, another surprise landed in my mailbox. An unmarked envelope stuffed with photographs. The shots were crystal clear: Lucas Green and 2 other men, dressed in utility coveralls, burying PVC pipes behind Maple Drive late one night. The telephoto images captured faces, license plates, even equipment numbers traceable to rental companies. Whoever took these pictures had serious skill and professional gear. The exact location matched the illegal connection point in Page's lawsuit diagrams, except the photos showed 3 men staging digging trenches with shovels and tossing in plastic pipe sections. It was like watching a set being built for a movie. Fake infrastructure, designed to fool anyone who glanced quickly without digging deeper. Curiosity got the better of me. I drove out there myself with a borrowed metal detector and a camping shovel. My neighbor Jim had reluctantly lent me the detector after I told him about the lawsuit. His reaction stung suspicion instead of support. He even muttered about how good my water pressure seemed compared to his. Thanks to Page's propaganda, even people I considered friends were starting to doubt me. At the site, I documented everything: GPS coordinates, photos, notes. As I worked, my phone rang. Paige Whitman. Her voice carried the same authority she'd used at the home meeting, but with a sharper edge this time. She accused me of trespassing and tampering with critical infrastructure, warning that I could face even more charges. In the background, I could hear Lucas whispering instructions, feeding her lines. Their desperation was showing. I hit record on my phone. Paige insisted that I was interfering with sensitive monitoring equipment, that alarms were being triggered, and that federal agents could show up any minute. But from where I stood, I could literally see the end of their buried plastic pipe. No sensors, no security hardware, just a half-baked setup meant to look official. She wasn't confident anymore. She was improvising. Paige's threats shifted tone as the call went on, almost like she was improvising on the spot, scrambling to keep me from collecting evidence that would unravel everything they'd built. Her clumsy intimidation attempts insulted my intelligence more than they scared me. While I was still on the phone, 3 men arrived wearing utility company uniforms and claimed they were with Meadowbrook Utility Services. They demanded I stop interfering with what they called authorized maintenance. At first glance, their badges and truck looked convincing, but the whole act felt wrong. Real utility crews don't just show up unannounced. They coordinate with county offices, secure permits, and follow strict procedures. These men looked uneasy, like they hadn't rehearsed their story well enough. One of them, a stocky guy with rough hands, stepped closer as though to intimidate me when I pressed them for verification. For a moment, the setup worked. They wanted me to feel cornered and outnumbered. But when I phoned the county utility office, Sarah Mitchell confirmed what I already suspected. No company called Meadowbrook Utility Services existed in their contractor database. These weren't utility workers, they were impersonators. That meant they had just added federal charges to their growing list of crimes. Before they left, I managed to snap clear pictures of their license plates, faces, and equipment. That evidence alone could help investigators identify them later. Their timing, showing up immediately after my tense call with Paige, told me something even more unsettling: they were likely tracking my communications or even my location. If they had already hacked county systems, monitoring my phone wasn't far-fetched. After they hurried off, I examined the gear they'd abandoned. A pressure gauge sat unattached, and other devices were nothing but props made to look real at a glance but useless upon inspection. The illusion was impressive in its detail, but once again, it collapsed under scrutiny. Whoever orchestrated this scam clearly understood how to manipulate appearances and psychology. Most people wouldn't question what looked like official equipment. Among the abandoned items were rental tags from Morrison Tools, a local supply company. That breadcrumb was too good to ignore. I called the store, reported the equipment, and asked about the renter. The manager, Carol, told me Lucas Green himself had checked it out using a company credit card already flagged for suspicious activity. Apparently, this wasn't the first time their rentals had been tied to shady HOA-related disputes. The scheme was broader than I'd imagined, bleeding into rental fraud, credit card abuse, and even identity theft across multiple businesses. By the time I returned to my car, I had a mountain of evidence: photos of the staged infrastructure, the impersonators, my recorded call with Paige, and proof linking Lucas to the equipment rentals. For the first time, I felt like I might finally have enough to bring their entire operation down. That confidence didn't last long. My phone buzzed with another anonymous message that froze me in place. This time, the photo wasn't of me at a county office or out in the neighborhood. It was my own HOA shot from inside my backyard. The camera captured my well pump and septic system in chilling detail. Whoever was behind this wasn't just faking maps and pipes anymore. They were inside my private space, erasing the last line between investigation and invasion. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse. The imposing marble, heavy security, and sterile atmosphere all seemed designed to remind people like me just how small we were in the system. I clutched my evidence folder tightly, hoping to get a quiet moment to review before the storm began. Paige arrived not long after, flanked by a small army. 3 lawyers in tailored suits surrounded her, radiating polished confidence. Lucas followed, wheeling in carts stacked with binders and equipment. What had started as a neighborhood dispute had been transformed into a spectacle, as though I were standing trial in some massive corporate case. Judge Robert Mason presided, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the summary. His reputation for fairness gave me hope, but sitting alone across from Paige's high-priced legal team made my stomach knot with anxiety. Their lead attorney, Jennifer Hayes, launched into a carefully crafted narrative. According to her, I was no innocent homeowner but a calculated thief exploiting loopholes to steal utilities. She used technical diagrams and charts, painting me as some mastermind hiding behind claims of property rights. The story was persuasive, polished and dangerously convincing. For a moment, I wondered if my evidence would even hold up. When it was my turn, I shuffled forward with nothing but my folder. No glossy exhibits or high-powered legal team to bolster me. Still, I laid out everything: the falsified maps, the staged infrastructure, the fraudulent equipment rentals. I explained the county database records, the photographs, the recordings. Judge Mason listened carefully, asking occasional pointed questions about dates and sources. Though his face revealed nothing, sweat ran down my back as I tried not to miss a single critical detail. Then came the questions, and that's where their perfect facade began to fracture. When Mason pressed Lucas for technical specifics, he stumbled. How had I supposedly drilled through solid bedrock without permits or heavy machinery? Where were the construction records required by law? His answers contradicted his earlier testimony, unraveling threads of their case one by one. At one point, a spectator in the gallery muttered "liar" as Lucas floundered, prompting a ripple of laughter. For the first time, Paige's confidence faltered. Jennifer Hayes tried to recover by painting me as an outsider, someone who'd resisted HOA rules and was likely to cut corners. She implied my financial background made me capable of orchestrating fraud. But her argument felt flimsy, like a personal attack rather than a legal one. The collapse continued when Judge Mason requested clarification about the technical diagrams their team had submitted. Lucas admitted he hadn't prepared them, nor could he explain them. They'd come from a mysterious consultant who conveniently was not present and whose credentials couldn't be verified. When pressed for details and contact information, Lucas suddenly grew defensive, insisting that everything was proprietary business data and somehow shielded under attorney-client privilege. The excuse was laughably, did he really believe a federal judge would allow anonymous, unverifiable technical evidence into the record? The moment I presented the county database records, panic rippled through Page's legal team. Sarah Mitchell's official documentation, complete with timestamps and digital signatures, showed beyond doubt that the maps had been altered. Those records flatly contradicted their claim that the utility connections were long-standing. Hayes objected over and over, but Judge Mason dismissed each challenge, demanding explanations for why the government's records exposed forged revisions linked directly to Lucas Green's authorization codes. Then I played my recording of Page's phone call, the one where she threatened me as I investigated the fake pipe setup. Hearing her voice in open court was like listening to a confession. She spoke as someone fully aware of the staged evidence and the fake utility workers she had sent to scare me. Hayes tried to argue that the recording was illegal, but single-party consent laws made it perfectly admissible. For the first time that day, Judge Mason's neutral mask cracked, his suspicion plain as Page's threats echoed through the chamber. During the lunch break, I overheard Page's legal team arguing in hushed but heated tones. Hayes urged immediate withdrawal before more evidence surfaced, while Page stubbornly insisted they could still salvage the case with community witnesses. Lucas, pale and silent in the corner, looked as though he were silently calculating prison terms for fraud, database tampering, and impersonating government officials. The confident machine that had rolled into court that morning was now reduced to frightened conspirators scrambling for escape. That was when a county utilities officer approached me quietly in the hallway. His uniform bore the name Mark Thompson, and the weight of 15 years of service showed in both his credentials and his lined expression. "We need to talk about Lucas," he said simply. Mark had taken emergency leave to testify, fully aware it could cost him his career. His hands trembled as he raised them to swear the oath, a visible sign of just how much this moment was costing him personally. What he revealed changed my entire understanding of Lucas's scheme. It began 6 months earlier. Lucas had approached Mark outside work, pretending to represent multiple HOA boards. At first, it sounded legitimate, questions about regulatory compliance, boundaries, and documentation. Mark had explained procedures for database access and map revisions without realizing Lucas was collecting intel for fraud. The shift from harmless questions to outright bribery was gradual. First, Lucas offered $500 as consulting fees to smooth over approvals for supposed mapping corrections. Then, the offers grew. $2,000 for direct database access and forged authorization codes. Mark refused, and that was when the intimidation began. Anonymous calls threatened his job. Strange cars appeared outside his house. Notes were left on his windshield, one after his daughter's school diet. "Stop asking questions." The threats cut deep, referencing his family's routines, his wife's job, his child's schedule. It was clear they had studied his personal life in chilling detail. Mark admitted the harassment nearly broke him. The stress bled into his marriage. Sleepless nights piled up, and his wife begged him to give Lucas what he wanted for the sake of their children's safety. But it was his daughter, asking why her father always looked scared, that finally gave him the strength to resist. He realized fleeing would only teach her to yield to bullies. Mark had kept everything: emails, notes, details about targeted properties, even Lucas's victim lists. The documents revealed Lucas wasn't random, he was deliberate. He targeted the elderly, immigrants, and people on fixed income as those least able to hire attorneys or challenge fraudulent claims. It was systematic predation disguised as neighborhood disputes. Mark also showed how Lucas's fabricated evidence fell apart under professional scrutiny. His altered records ignored drainage patterns, soil stability, and construction standards, of basic engineering realities. The scam worked only when victims settled quietly. If an expert ever looked too closely, the illusion collapsed. His testimony also revealed Lucas had tried to recruit other county employees under the same guise of consulting, who reported the attempts to supervisors instead of taking the bait. The pattern showed a clear strategy. Lucas knew that controlling official records was the only way his scheme could survive. Judge Mason listened intently, treating Mark with visible respect. The contrast between Mark's calm integrity and Lucas's fraudulent bluster was impossible to miss. During cross-examination, Hayes made a tactical misstep, suggesting Mark was fabricating everything to cover his own failures. Mark's measured responses, backed by years of documented reports and careful explanations of proper procedures, made her look desperate. He had followed every rule, reported every concern, and now, at great personal risk, was telling the truth under oath. Then Mark dropped the final revelation. The FBI was already watching. They were ready to act. By the afternoon, word had spread. The gallery filled with reporters and residents, turning the civil case into a public spectacle with the energy of a criminal trial. Judge Mason had to call for order more than once as tension surged. "I closed my case with Paige's threatening voicemails projected into the courtroom. Her voice rang against marble walls, describing staged infrastructure and warning me not to dig deeper. The sound alone stripped away any chance of denial." Her face turned pale, her expression unraveling as her own words betrayed her. The slideshow that followed sealed it. Surveillance photos displayed Lucas and his associates in the dead of night, burying disconnected pipes, staging equipment, leaving visual breadcrumbs for anyone willing to investigate. Every image was catalogued: faces, license plates, serial numbers, rental company receipts. It was no longer a story about harassment. It was a conspiracy, methodical, predatory, and undeniable. The fraud was so clumsily executed it left a trail of evidence in every direction. Jennifer Hayes eventually gave up objecting to exhibits and just sat frozen, looking like she already knew defeat was inevitable. Judge Mason turned his attention to Lucas, and what followed was nothing short of a masterclass in tearing apart false testimony with basic logic. How could someone allegedly steal water for half a decade without leaving behind any signs of trenching or construction? Where were the permits for underground connections that would have required heavy machinery and excavation? Why wasn't there a single maintenance log for infrastructure that supposedly needed seasonal servicing and pressure checks? Each simple question shredded the narrative further, leaving Lucas trapped between doubling down on obvious lies or admitting things that only deepened his criminal exposure. His shaky, stumbling answers made it clear to everyone in that courtroom he wasn't just lying. He was a willing cog in Paige's scheme. The evidence shifted the case from isolated harassment to full-blown organized racketeering. Testimony showed they'd run the same scam for years, targeting dozens of homeowners with fabricated maps, forged documents, and legal threats designed to scare people into paying settlements without ever seeing a judge. Mark's testimony proved the scope. My records nailed down intent. This wasn't an error, it was a deliberate enterprise. Hayes tried one last lifeline, blaming a rogue employee for tampering with databases, but the recordings told a different story. Paige herself, on tape, coordinating with fake utility crews. The pattern of targeting multiple properties showed planning on a scale only possible with HOA resources and authority. Hayes's defense grumbled under the sheer weight of evidence. And then Paige lost control. Her composure snapped, and in front of federal cameras she went on a tirade about protecting neighborhood standards and preserving property values. It escalated into outright discrimination until she screamed, "People like him drag our neighborhood down." That outburst turned the entire courtroom. In an instant, she admitted the real motive behind years of harassment, targeting people who didn't fit her definition of belonging. Judge Mason's calm reply cut sharper than any objection. "Mr. Wright doesn't even live in your HOA. He is outside your authority." With one sentence, he exposed the entire case as fraudulent, malicious, and beyond her jurisdiction. During a short recess, Lucas whispered frantically with his attorney about plea deals. By then, it didn't matter. The FBI was already circling. What began as an $18,000 civil dispute had exploded into a federal case carrying 20-year prison terms. Even Lucas's veteran defense lawyer looked like the floor had dropped out beneath him. Judge Mason dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice. then immediately referred the case for federal prosecution. Conspiracy, fraud, intimidation, civil rights violations. The charges stacked high enough to bury Page and Lucas for decades. When the gavel came down, the silence in that courtroom was broken only by the sound of FBI agents stepping forward with handcuffs. Walking out of that courthouse, I wasn't just relieved, I felt vindicated. Reporters swarmed the steps. Local media wanted my reaction to the harassment. National outlets pressed for what this meant for HOA accountability across the country. I declined every interview, letting the court records and arrests speak for themselves. Agent Rebecca White found me outside. She explained that my case had supplied the missing puzzle piece. Federal investigators had been tracking utility fraud patterns for months, but they needed hard evidence and victim testimony. My refusal to settle had given them exactly what was required to bring the hammer down. Within hours, Page and Lucas were booked on charges ranging from bribery to civil rights violations under color of authority. Their accomplices, phony utility workers and corrupt insiders, would face conspiracy charges just as severe. The message was loud and clear. This kind of HOA corruption wouldn't be tolerated. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. With Page gone, residents began fixing fences, planting gardens, and collaborating without fear of harassment. The toxic surveillance culture evaporated. Property values rebounded instantly once buyers knew they wouldn't face arbitrary enforcement from a corrupt HOA. I was awarded $10,000 for malicious prosecution, paid straight from the HOA's emergency fund. But the money wasn't the victory. The real win was knowing families would never again endure what I had. Federal prosecutors now had precedent that made HOA racketeering far more dangerous for anyone tempted to try. The investigation later revealed even darker truths: tax fraud, permit scams, and deliberate targeting of minority homeowners to push them out of desirable neighborhoods. It was never about utility, it was about power, control, and exclusion. Federal civil rights charges would add years to their sentences, cementing the case as one of systematic abuse. Mark Thompson, the whistleblower, was finally recognized. With federal protections in place, he was honored for the courage it took to expose corruption despite threats against his family. His testimony forced reforms inside county agencies, preventing future tampering and ensuring red flags would be caught early. When it was over, I went home and built a small stone garden around my well pump. To anyone else it was landscaping, to me it was a monument. Each stone marked the values defended in that courtroom. 6 months later, drinking clean water from that same well, I realized it fully. This fight was never about water, it was about dignity. The truth doesn't protect itself, you have to fight for it. If you've stuck with me this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think. And if you want to support the channel, hit that little thanks button. Stay grounded, stay stubborn, and don't let anyone else write your ending.